The silent guessed it was an unusually quiet evening in the small town of Ravens Hollow, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone and secrets were rare. But tonight, something felt different. A heavy fog had rolled in, thick and suffocating, casting an eerie silence over the streets. The only sound was the occasional creak of an old house settling. Emily Winters, a young woman in her late 20s, had just moved into a charming but slightly run-down house on the edge of town. It had been her dream to live in a cottage near the forest, away from the bustle of the city. She found the perfect place, small, quaint, and just isolated enough for some peace and quiet. But tonight, as she sat curled up with a book in the living room, a strange unease gnawed at her. She tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the unfamiliarity of the new house and the long day of unpacking. But as the clock struck midnight, the unease turned to something darker. A soft, almost imperceptible knock echoed from the door. Emily froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't been expecting anyone. No visitors, no deliveries. The town was far enough from the main road that there wasn't a chance anyone would be passing by. The knock came again, this time more urgent. Knock, knock, knock. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. She stood up slowly, her breath shallow, and walked toward the door. Her hand trembled as it reached the handle. She didn't know what to expect. No one had warned her about this place, but she had heard the occasional whisper in town about strange occurrences in that part of the forest. When she opened the door, there was no one there, just a thick, creeping fog swirling around the steps. Emily blinked in confusion. Had someone been playing a prank on her? The hair on the back of her neck stood up as she stepped outside, calling into the mist. Hello? No answer. The silence was deafening, and then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it. A shadow, slightly darker than the night, slipped across the yard. It was quick, barely noticeable, but enough to send a chill down her spine. She spun around, but the yard was empty. She stepped back inside, closing the door behind her, trying to convince herself it was just the fog playing tricks on her eyes. But then, again, a faint sound echoed through the house. A soft scraping, as if something was dragging along the floor. It came from upstairs. The house creaked under the weight of the silence as she moved cautiously toward the staircase. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hall. Each step up seemed louder, more pronounced than the last. Her breath came in quick gasps, and her hand gripped the railing as though it were her only lifeline. At the top of the stairs, the scraping noise stopped. For a moment there was nothing, no sound, just the heavy beating of her heart in her ears. Emily's feet moved, almost against her will, down the dark hallway toward her bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The room was cold, and the air was thick with the smell of something wrong. There, in the center of the room, was a figure, clad in tattered ancient clothes, its back turned toward her. Who are you?" Emily stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The figure did not respond. It simply stood there, unmoving, silent. Its body was hunched over, as if the weight of its own existence was too much to bear. Suddenly the figure jerked its head toward her, its face contorted in an expression of pure agony. Its eyes were dark and empty, like hollow pits. It opened its mouth, but no sound came out, just a gaping, silent scream. Emily stumbled back, her body frozen with terror. She wanted to scream, but her throat tightened, trapping the sound inside. The figure took a step toward her, its limbs moving at unnatural angles, like a marionette whose strings had been pulled too tightly. "Get out of my house," the figure rasped, its voice a guttural whisper that seemed to reverberate inside her mind. Her legs finally found the strength to move, and she ran. She bolted down the stairs, the door slamming behind her. She didn't stop to grab anything, didn't care if she left everything behind. She just needed to get out. The fog had thickened, and the streets were now completely swallowed by it. Emily ran toward the town square, hoping to find someone, anyone. But the streets were empty. The houses were dark. No lights, no movement. It was as if the town had vanished, leaving her alone in the choking fog. Then she heard it, a whisper carried by the wind. "Emily!" She spun around, but no one was there. "Emily!" "Come back." It was a voice she recognized, her mother's. Terror gripped her chest. Her mind raced. Her mother had passed away years ago. There was no way it could be her. But the voice was so clear, so familiar. "Come back," the voice called again, this time from deep within the fog. Without thinking, Emily followed the sound. It led her back to her house. The door was wide open, the inside dark and still. And there, standing at the threshold, was the figure again, waiting. "Why didn't you listen?" it whispered, its voice cold and hollow. "You never should have come." The fog swallowed her whole, and the door slammed shut behind her. The next morning, the town of Ravens Hollow awoke to an unsettling quiet. The fog had lifted, but something was missing. Emily Winters had disappeared, leaving behind only a thin trail of footprints leading to her front door, which was wide open. No one in town ever saw her again, but sometimes on cold, foggy nights you can hear her whispering in the wind, "Come back,